unfortunately, due to some issues with life, weather, I'm sure all of you know the story. He was unable to make it here in the Southeast in person, so he will be speaking with us virtually. Greg Hill is the inaugural Audain Chair for Senior Curator of Indigenous Art at the National Gallery. He is Kanyen'kehaka, member of the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. Building a platform for Indigenous art and art history at the National Gallery, Greg has assembled a leading collection of contemporary Indigenous art from around the world, as well as curated several retrospective exhibitions for senior Indigenous artists in Canada, such as Norval Morrisseau, and Alex Janvier, and is co-curator for the ongoing curated exhibition of contemporary international Indigenous art initiated in 2013, with Sakahán and followed by Àbadakone. Continue to inspire when continuel 2019 to 2020. Phil is co-curator for Shelley Niro 500 Year Itch 2023 and Àbadakone 2025. Artist himself, Greg has been exhibiting his work publicly since 1989, with more than 75 exhibitions. Exploring aspects of colonialism, nationalism, and concepts of place and community through the lens of Kanyen'kehaka ancestry, his work can be found in public collections in Canada and private collections in Canada and international. And on a side note, I even got to read about it just a few weeks ago, my own master's program. I'm very excited to welcome Greg Hill.
Okay, so we just introduced Greg, and he is here with us via Zoom. I'm going to see if this will work. Okay, Greg, are you able to turn on your camera? Or unmute yourself? I've pinned you. I'm going to unpin us. Remove this pin, so it's just you. Greg, can you hear me? Can anyone hear me online?
We can hear you online.
I can hear you.
Oh, hey,
It's
Greg. How are you?
I'm good.
Well, thank you for joining us online. If you're ready, you can get started. We can't see you. So I know you wanted to show a PowerPoint. You want to try to do that? Oh,
Here I
hi.
am.
There you are.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm going to try to do this. I guess I'll just try to run the PowerPoint first here and see if that works.
Okay.
Sorry, I guess I have to do share the screen first. So I'm doing that.
Okay. Okay, we can see your screen.
Okay. And now what do you see? A blank screen?
Yes, we do. We see a blank screen.
Perfect.
I've heard sometimes images disappear.
No, it's a blank screen, but I guess if I was there physically, you would still see me as well.
Okay.
Which is a little strange because now you can't. So maybe I'll stop the screen sharing for a moment and just talk to you more directly. So I'll do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I just I mean, I regret not being able to be there in person. It's great that we at least have this option. And I wanted to thank you, Dixie, for the invite, and it's great to hear a little bit of you know, the awards that you were just giving out, and how I think that really shows how connected you are to community, how the support that you have, and that's, I think, an important thing to have and to take into consideration, and it relates to what I'm going to be talking about actually, I think in both of our presentations today, and and I'll just kind of get into that more. So I wanted to also kind of a strange territorial recognition now because I'm here, but that gives me the advantage of explaining to you a little bit about this place where I am. I'm coming to you from near Ottawa, just north of Ottawa in Canada. Ottawa is the capital of Canada, not far from Montreal, and I live just north of there in a place called Chelsea. I'm coming to you from my home office where I've been for the last couple of years. We're still not back in the office like many of you, I'm assuming. And these territories are unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territories. The entire watershed of the Ottawa River. Ottawa sits at the confluence of three rivers. The Ottawa, otherwise known as Kitchissippi, the Tanaga River, which is the colonial name is the Gatineau River, the Rideau River, and the man-made waterway, the Rideau Canal. So it's quite a special place geographically, and it's one where this country, Canada, has built the foundation of the colonial government in this place, and acknowledges that it's actually on unceded territory. There's been no land surrender, no legal land transition from the Algonquin peoples to the Queen, and now the government of Canada. So that's a kind of a strange situation to be in. For myself, I'm Mohawk in French, Kanyen'kehaka in French, and I've been living in this territory for almost 30 years, and bought a property, but it's actually not even really illegal. Like, I don't actually own title to something that was to lands that were never surrendered. So that's kind of the state that we're in here, and I know land issues are always an ongoing issue everywhere in North America because of our complex histories. So that's what I wanted to talk about, some of what the National Gallery of Canada does in that context of colonialism. What is an art gallery? What is a museum? What is a national museum and its role in relation to Indigenous peoples, specifically when we're talking about ideas of nation and First Nations, and how those conflict and sometimes can complement each other, possibly in ways. So there's a lot to it, and the way I'm coming to it is through some of what's been done over the last 2 decades at the National Gallery. I've been at the National Gallery now for 22 years, so a long time, and in different roles. I started off as a curatorial assistant in Canadian art, and then worked in contemporary art for another short period, and then the National Gallery decided to do more with respect of Indigenous art and forming an Indigenous art department. And I've been the curator of Indigenous art, now the senior curator of Indigenous art since 2008. So over that time, there's been quite a bit of change, and I want to get into it a little bit now. So I'm going to start my presentation, and I'm really going to try to have time for questions at the end too. I really would love to hear back from some of you, or try to answer some of your questions. So with that in mind, if someone needs to prompt me to wrap things up because we're running out of time, please do so. Okay. So attempting to share the screen again. So you're seeing the black screen again?
No, we're seeing your presenter view.
Ah. Okay, stop that. And how's that?
There we go. Yep.
All right. So the subject of this talk is really something, like I mentioned, that goes back many years. And most recently, I participated in a series of talks with Gerald McMaster, a name you might be familiar with. And it was titled Indigenizing the Art Museum. So really kind of updating the perspective on how art museums can be repositioned through kind of an active mode of what we're calling indigenizing at the time. But I want to take it a step further in what I'm explaining to you a little bit about how what does indigenizing mean? How do we get there? And it's a kind of a long path through the history of colonization. We have to decolonize, and then we have to work towards this concept of indigenization. What does that mean? And really that's a step in the process. And how do we, what's the next step? And in my mind, as a Kanyen'kehaka person, and starting to employ Kanyen'kehaka language and concepts, that would be, that we're Ongwahonwe-inizing ourselves, that we're becoming more aware of Indigenous concepts, Indigenous ways of being, Indigenous knowledges, in order beginning to find ways to integrate those within these structures that are colonial at the core. The idea that a museum, is coming out of a history that is imperial and consumptive, really of racist origins, and then reconstructing it in an open, collaborative, lateral, and community-minded structure that enables the role and supports, the kind of healthy functioning of what we call a museum. So I mentioned earlier about the site where the National Gallery is, and this is just to give you a visual context to that. You can see that's the Ottawa or Kitchissippi River, and then in the background there is the National Gallery of Canada, and the large kind of iceberg shape is actually an artwork that I'll talk about a little bit more. But this view is from Parliament Hill, so where the government is located. In the right of the image, well, here is the Canadian Museum of Civilization. Can you see my cursor?
Yes, yes, we can.
Oh, okay. And, you know, and also there's the church. So we kind of have everything here. This is the Ottawa River. This is the Rideau Canal. So there are, within this one image, there are sites of the colonial history, the imposition of governments on Indigenous peoples, the changes to the landscape through resource exploitation, the history of Ottawa as a logging center, and then it becomes a military capital. So there's a lot, and then there's what's going on elsewhere. So we get into how does the National Gallery begin to change, given that there's those kinds of inherited histories, you know, that affect the institution and how it's perceived and how it operates. And one of those is going back to 2003, not really how I ended up at the National Gallery, was to work on this project to begin to integrate Indigenous art into what was then called the Canadian galleries. And one of the unique features of the National Gallery is that inside one of the gallery spaces is an entire reinstallment of a historic church, the Rideau Chapel. As an artwork, it's there. It's actually there because of the carved features in the architecture. But you know, nevertheless, it carries a lot of symbolic import, right? It's a church. It's not a sanctified space anymore, but it still reads that way. So an interesting addition to it was to take this baptismal font by Frederick Alexie and insert it in that space. And it's a very interesting object in that as a Simpson artist, he's carving a religious object that, but in Simpson style. So it's kind of this fusion of Christianity and more of an Indigenous way of thinking maybe as well. And that carried through to other installations in the galleries. So these are the series of galleries that purport to tell the history, the visual history of Canada. And until we started inserting some of these, we inserted 100 works by Indigenous artists in the galleries. There was never a work by an Indigenous artist in the Canadian gallery. So it seemed revolutionary at the time. It may not be so much now, which is, I think, a good thing. But one of the things we did was put a canoe in the space in the space that represents, you know, Canada's iconic artists, the Group of Seven. So it's kind of considered a hallowed space within the museum, and then we were intervening with a canoe, a birch bark canoe, and positioning it there as a sculpture, to be considered a sculpture, you know, in the same way that a sculptor it's a negotiation with the materials, and you arrive at a form. That was kind of how we were looking at the canoe, sort of trying to get viewers past the idea of its function only, and to look at it also as an artwork, as a negotiation with materials. And that kind of opens the door to beginning to look at objects made by you know, artists, Indigenous artists, in a very different way, in an importantly different way. I can't tell you how much resistance there was to trying to put these things in the museum at the beginning. I mean, there were many arguments that, you know, it just doesn't fit, we can't do this. but it was a big contradiction because in the same galleries was the National Gallery has always shown, well, since 1979, a collection of silver, which is silver reliquaries, religious silver, trophies, so all these kinds of things. And it was, the blind spot was that there was a contradiction between saying, no, you can't put works by Indigenous artists in this institution because they have a function, and then, you know, it was there already. That got a big reboot during Canada's 2017 year, 150th anniversary. And there was a lot more money reinvested in it, and the presentation got a big boost, which was great and really cemented this idea deeply into the institution, and with the renaming of the galleries that are now known as the Indigenous and Canadian galleries. And we started to get views like this. So this series of Inuit sculptures within the center of the room, and then on the walls of the gallery, there are these galleries, the Indigenous and Canadian galleries. There's 33 galleries in total that are kind of all linked together in a U shape with main galleries and side galleries. So it's quite an extensive space. I don't know if any of you've been able to be at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. Hope you can sometime, but I'm just giving you a very quick look into it. So the kind of really interesting thing here is that within the timeline of the gallery, so this is the early 60s, there's abstraction is happening, and based in the center in Montreal, schools of abstraction, but at the same time, Inuit art is emerging in the South. So when you're walking down a famous art gallery street in Montreal, Sherbrooke, you would literally walk past a window of a gallery featuring abstract art, and then the next gallery would be featuring Inuit art, and collectors were buying both. They would buy abstract work to have on their walls, and then if they wanted some relief from the abstraction, they, would look to the more figurative works of Inuit artists. And so we're kind of, it was replicating that point in time where there were these different art forms emerging. And then in the back, in the very background, you can see it's in the next gallery, and as the galleries continue on chronologically in the 70s and 80s, we have work. There's a work there by Norval Morrisseau, who is one of our very important artists. This is an example of one of the galleries for the solo exhibition that was held for Norval Morrisseau in 2006. That was put forth as recognized as the first solo exhibition for a First Nations artist at the National Gallery, and that didn't happen until 2006. When we say First Nations, being specific, because there was a previous solo exhibition for Inuit artist Pudlo Pulat in, I believe it was 1990, so quite a bit earlier. That was followed up by other artists like Daphne Ojig and Robert Davidson, Carl Beam in 2010, Alex Janvier in 2016. And all of these exhibitions I worked on. I was either the curator or the host curator, hosting a touring exhibition that we installed at the gallery. So I've been very involved in this cycle of change. And then when we get to 2013, there's a big shift, and I'm really excited about this project. It's an ongoing series of exhibitions, and now recently a commitment by the National Gallery, by the institution to commit to this series of exhibitions as every 5 years or so. We mount an international contemporary Indigenous art exhibition. And so the first one was in 2013. And it was titled Sakahán, and that means to ignite something, to light a fire. And really one of the defining features of it were, I think the impetus behind, at that point, which is now almost 10 years ago, was to really make viewers aware that Indigenous peoples are producing art, or still here, live everywhere in the world pretty much, and make a great variety of beautiful things that can be very informed and related to what's going on in the contemporary Western art world, or not. Can be coming very much from customary practices, and we wanted to show as much of it as possible. So this turned out to be the largest ever exhibition that the gallery did. And I'm returning to this image just to kind of give you an example of the scale, because that iceberg there was actually one of the artworks in the exhibition. And it's a work by Inaugural, and it's supposed to be an iceberg, and the idea was that this show is occurring in the summer and the iceberg is melting. So there are actually speakers in the Taiga garden there of the recorded sounds of an iceberg melting and crumbling. And this show ran all summer, and this became kind of a landmark for people to find the iceberg in the summer in Ottawa. And there was, just to give you a sense of the scale, there were, I think, 89 artists or so in the exhibition, and nearly 200 works. And some of those works ranged in scale from what you just saw, and other outdoor installations like this one by Corey Bulpit, that were paintings to photo series to everything you can imagine and more, and also involving community in a way that the institution hadn't previously. So in recognition of Algonquin territory and bringing Indigenous peoples coming from different Indigenous nations all over the globe to these territories, we really wanted to get into protocols and honoring the kinds of protocols and the things that should happen. And it was more of a start to begin to understand and to begin and find ways to do these things more appropriately. It's been a really big learning process for the institution, for all of us, but an important one and a necessary one. So to give you just a few more examples from this show, this of scale too. This is a work by Vernon Aki. It's called Can't Chant. He's an artist from Australia, and did this piece that was both reflecting on Indigenous culture and territory. He lives in I'm sorry, I'm just forgetting the name of the city now. Brisbane, and there was a conflict on the beaches near there, where, and it became known as the Cronulla race riots, and it was conflict between white surfer Australians and immigrants, and some of the chants that there were kind of racist taunts and things that were happening, and there was violence, and there were a lot of events transpired, and Vernon was there kind of watching it from the sidelines, thinking, you people are all fighting over a territory, over beaches that are actually our lands, and you have no concept of that fact, and it just doesn't register. So he titled the piece "Can't Chant." He created these surfboards that have traditional designs on them. He created a video that showed in part the only Australian Aboriginal surfer at the time, and then these are some of his friends kind of reclaiming the beach with the surfboards. There was a narrative of a surfboard as a stand-in for an Aboriginal body, wrapped in the barbed wire and floating down one of the tributaries to the ocean. And then you came out of the video and saw the backs of the surfboards and all of the faces of his friends and family members on the backs of the boards. And then the phrases, the surfer phrases, really, that, and other texts that he collected and documented from the time. And hang 10 is a surfer phrase for hanging your 10 toes off the front of the surfboard, but it also resonates terribly as the hanging of 10 individuals, as kind of represented by these hanging surfboards and those faces on the backsides. So a very powerful work. I wanted to include a few works that I think from artists that I'm assuming you're all familiar with. Sonia Keller-Combs, coming from Anchorage, just to show you that that we were going as broadly in a sense, and Alaska wasn't left out. Also Nicholas Galanin, there were 3 works from him, besides the Bear Mask and Good Book that you see here, but he did another piece called Nature Will Reclaim You, which was a carving in a rock outcropping that was part of just on the outside the National Gallery, on National Gallery property. And what he did was carve 200-year-old or so French wallpaper designs into the limestone rock there. And this rock, it's quite crumbly, and every spring it crumbles more, and the piece itself is returning to nature, hence the title. But I remember when talking to him that he really loved the idea of 500 years from now, archaeologists coming upon these petroglyphs, these rock carvings, and being confounded by what was there, like how did this happen that these French wallpaper designs are petroglyphs. And I think how that fits into Nicholas Galanin's work in general. Toru Kaizawa is an Ainu artist from Hokkaido, and he did this really interesting piece again that was about identity. How those designs are customary Ainu designs that would appear in clothing and textiles, So it's kind of, the piece is really about, you wear these things are part of you, and then you have maybe an external covering, and then with the zipper being there, he's saying that you can choose to show, to put on display how much of your identity you choose. And to give you a sense of the range, one of the things that we really wanted to get across was that Indigenous identity in a global context involves so many people, and that there are so many assumptions about what Indigenous means, what Indigenous peoples look like, where they come from, that we really wanted to begin to challenge that. So we included artists such as Wangechi Mutu, who is Kikuyu, born in Nairobi, but working out of New York. So this is her, one of her wounded wall works. Moving on to the most recent iteration of the series of contemporary international and Indigenous art exhibitions is Àbadakone. And again, an Algonquin word. This one coming to us from the Elders Language Committee at Kanyen'kehaka is the closest Algonquin community. And Àbadakone translates as continuous fire. And I think it's a title that we're going to stick with for the next one. The next iteration of this show is planned for 2025. And our director just moved on, unfortunately, but before she left, she had made a commitment to these series of exhibitions happening 5 more times. So that would be another 25 years at least, longer than I'll be there. But it's really an important notion to say that this will continue. So with Àbadakone, things really developed, and I think it's really important to have this amount of space that we have between the exhibitions, because it gives time for things to evolve, the institutional change that we're talking about, developing more our own networks, our understanding the institution's capability to do things. So when we got to Àbadakone, we were a little bit better prepared, I would say, to involve community. There was a wonderful commitment. It came, unfortunately, a little bit last minute to bring all of the artists to the opening, which is a big undertaking, considering, as I said previously, like the artists are coming from all over the world. And there were 77 artists in Àbadakone. We did manage to get around 55 to come to the opening. And this was a scene from the opening ceremony where we did a processional march into the main gallery space, or sorry, not the gallery space, but main atrium space, the Great Hall. And above you can see an installation of Jordan Bennett's Tepkik, and the artists on stage there that could make it. Many of the artists chose to wear their traditional dress, their customary dress, and it was a very special evening. It was the most ever attended opening for any event at the National Gallery, and I think a real milestone, certainly for me and for a lot of the artists that participated. We felt like we were in the Indigenous Art Olympics or something. It was really quite wonderful. Just a shot of some of the artists that were gathered. There's a Mata'aho Collective, Elang Luluan, Lakaluk, Williamson Bathory, Evgeny Salander, Frederick Prost, Yuar Nango, among many others. I wanted to include Brian Adams because we had this work featured in the exhibition, and I love this work. It became one of our key images, and just yeah, so you could see it. And just to give you a sense of some of the activities that occurred in and around and before the exhibition. So for Audain's piece that we'll have more of a look at in a couple of slides. He's building a Sami architectural library, and to do that, it's all about kind of what he terms indigenuity, how Indigenous peoples make use of things, repurpose things, look at what's around them in the environment, and put them to use. And as he's an architect and an artist, so he really comes to it from the idea of creating structures and creating structures that you could live in, or in this case, libraries. So he arrived to the gallery about 2 weeks earlier and immediately began foraging in his van, picking up roadkill, creating these structures outside the gallery. Then we would have fires, and we started hide tanning, and there was all kinds of activities that never happened at the gallery previously, and it was a real kind of community building and awareness project, and something really wonderful that transpired. People finding their connection to customary practices in an urban setting. So it was something that then became this artwork. So this was what Audain called a library. And eventually we were able to bring this into the collection, and there's like 3 versions of it. This grand version that was in the main entrance of the gallery, and then a smaller gallery version, and then importantly for UR, a mobile version, which is actually on view now in Montreal. So there's another view. So also, again, to give you an idea of the scope, from Taiwan is this artist from Rukai Nation, Aleng Luluan, and her work Between Dreams was featured in the exhibition proper. And then also these works by the Tribal Women's Artist Collective. And that's actually a very large group of 1,000. They represent 1,000 artists in India, and they're all artists that are doing customary paintings. They're usually doing them much smaller scale, but the paintings come from a larger scale practice of doing murals or paintings on wall surfaces. And then, so 3 artists came from India to do these 4 large murals, and they're Kovar and Sorhai mural paintings. And then this artist, Javanese artist from Jakarta, from Indonesia, and he's an artist who's really mixing a lot of things together, again, drawing on traditional customary practices, but also very much on contemporary graffiti aesthetics, and combining all of these things and creating these strange objects. But I just wanted to to finish with this one piece with a question, and with his question that he poses in the work itself is like, what else are we getting into in doing these kinds of things, and why? And I want to, I think, shift to involving you who are there in the audience there. And I think we have the advantage of maybe being able to take questions virtually, and well, for me, they're all going to be virtual, but taking questions maybe in the chat or also in the space there. So maybe we can do that. I'll stopping the sharing now.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. If anyone in the room would like to ask him a question, you can come over here. If you want him to see you, go in front of the webcam. And if anyone online has a question, you can just speak up now while the people in the audience here decide. Those artworks were so inspiring. You're beautiful. And I know that must have been a lot of work to put that together, but probably very fulfilling. Yeah,
for sure. And getting into the third iteration of it is going to be really exciting. It's supposed to be happening in 2025. I know I know what I showed you is a lot, and I guess I'm curious about one of the things I really regret in not being there is to get more of a sense of what's happening there, in terms of what you do in your respective museums with regard to the inclusion of Indigenous artists. I know the demographics are quite different there, so I assume there's strong representation, but that may not be the case. And I also wonder if there are any Indigenous artists in the audience that have any questions or can give their own interpretations of what's going on there.
We don't have anyone getting up in the audience yet, but if anyone online would like to say anything, please do. You can turn on your camera. Oh, we have someone coming from the audience. This is exciting. I'm going to turn off the webcam and let anyone asking questions sit here. Let me switch over to FaceTime camera. Okay, so if you have a question for him, you can sit here. I'm going to go get one. And then they should be able to hear you.
Okay, great. Good morning.
Hi.
Hi. One of the things that really was striking to me about your presentation is the idea of reclaiming space. So for us, for a long time, it's been a capacity issue of how much can we do inside of the building and what does moving outside of the building entail. And so as I'm wondering and imagining about you curating this type of opportunity for the community, quickly, two things. Can you speak a little bit about the engagement process and how that changes when you're inside the museum space and then venturing out as well into the public areas? And then if I may throw another one at you very briefly, I'm a director, right? And so I want to know how you funded that. We have the Art Acquisition Fund with generous support from the Rasmussen Foundation, and at the Kodiak History Museum, we've begun to explore commission work. We have one outdoor piece, but I'm just really curious about how you provide the opportunity for artists, both financially and in terms of space.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess I'll speak to that one first, because I think it's a fairly unique situation that the National Gallery of Canada is in as a federal institution representing the country. It gets good funding. There's, they have a pretty big budget. I think it's about $150 million a year. Staff is 300 people. So it's a large institution that is adequately funded to start, and you know, not dependent on corporate or private funding. So there's that, you know, but still within an institution, it's a matter of priorities. What are the priorities of the institution? Because no matter what your budget is, you still have to make decisions of where it's going to go. And if programming and I mean, we'll get into this with diversity, equity, and inclusion and access. If those aren't important concepts to the institution, then the money's not going to go there. So I think it was a bit of an offering of intent for our new director just coming in at the time, just before the opening of Àbadakone, to make the gesture of supporting bringing as many artists as possible to the opening. So what you don't hear is that, you know, it was for 3 years, and from the very first meeting for the exhibition, that was my ask, that we do the exhibition and we commit to bringing the artists to the opening. And you know, there's a lot of nodding heads, but it never happened. And it was only through this circumstance of a new director coming in and making a mark in a positive way that it happened. So that just gets back to what I was saying about priorities. In terms of engagement and the outside spaces, the first iteration of the show, Sakahán, was a super engagement. Again, like the gallery hadn't done before. We had 16 we saw a little bit of what happened at the gallery, but there were 16 other exhibit spaces in the National Capital Region. So it was basically like every community gallery space that could show artwork made a commitment to align with that exhibition with Sakahán and program Indigenous art contiguously or concurrently with Sakahán. So it was really like Indian Summer 2013 in the National Capital Region. It was incredible. So that was a super strong example of outreach and engagement, not one that we lived up to, I think, for Àbadakone, but again, you know, those are difficult choices that you make in doing anything, is like where you can put your efforts and what can you achieve. Yeah, I'll leave that at that. I think there was another question.
Yeah, hi, I'm Teal Hansen. I work at the Lanka Cultural Museum in Crowville, Alaska. I appreciated how you said that you like to have time in between your excavations just for things to evolve. It's kind of like one of those really obvious things that you actually don't really think about until you put it to words. So I appreciated you saying that. And then my other question was like, what areas do you think that you can improve in for your next one in 2025?
Yeah, good questions. I mean, the really great thing about doing a series of exhibitions is that you can look at where you could do better in the previous ones. So you have that benefit of and this is where the time comes in again, of doing that bit of analysis and seeing how things develop in the art world, in the critical art world, how things develop in terms of how artists are becoming aware of each other. One of the goals of the exhibition was to make artists aware of each other's practices in disparate parts of the world, find those kinds of connections and affinities, and hopefully see the benefits of that. And I think that did happen. In the 6 years between Sakahán and Àbadakone, there were friendships formed and residencies and opportunities for exchange and more awareness of the exhibition and awareness of these different practices, culturally, the cultural diversity. So all of those things helped, and I think we also recognized that we felt we didn't have enough representation of artists who trace their Indigenous heritage back to Africa. So whether they were part of the diaspora or actually still living in Africa. So we did more for that in Àbadakone. Yeah, so I think that that's important, and that's what I would say is another important feature of having that space in between. I find it's also necessary too, because if you do an exhibition, a large scale exhibition as a biennial or even as a triennial, you really don't have time to do anything else. And this is just, fortunately I have co-curators for these projects. And that makes it more possible, but I also have to do other exhibitions in between. So there's maybe that's something else that an organization has to take into considerations, is what's actually possible in terms of person hours and expectations and those kinds of things. But that's another issue.
We have a question from the audience here. It is 10, but we started a little bit late and we have a half-hour break here. So we have a little bit of flexibility. Do we think maybe 2 more questions? 2 or 3 more questions? So this is one of them.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I had a question in regards to something I read that you actually wrote about Àbadakone. You had mentioned in the exhibit itself, many of the artists kind of in their work shared and expressed a lot of Indigenous values and beliefs, specifically some in regards to the concept of time being continuous and how our ancestors are with us, and it affects our decisions that we make in the past and the present and the future. And I know for a non-Indigenous audience, sometimes these kind of values and beliefs can be very challenging to understand. So my question is, when you're developing your exhibits at your institution, what kind of conversations do you have, not just with the artists and your curatorial team, but specifically also your administration, in getting them to invest and to take on these kind of projects, and what kind of projects and what kind of themes that you want to express, and how you help to convey that to your non-Indigenous audience?
I think okay. So I'll try and I think there's 2 parts to your question. I'll try and do one of them first, and then if I didn't do it enough, answer both parts, we'll try that again. But I think, yeah. So with the way that the National Gallery of Canada is structured, is that there has been at least a fair amount of autonomy for curators, for curatorial staff. So there's the respect for a curatorial vision and developing that and then allowing that to happen. That the concept that the institution is there to support the development of ideas and help you as a curator to realize them, and you as a curator are working to help the artists realize their ideas and their dreams in some cases. Sometimes especially when you're talking about a commission or an artist developing a new work for the exhibition. So there's these like roles, these very important roles that you play when it's all functioning well, and the way it should be. So it doesn't always work that way. And that's where there's friction and conflict and all the behind the scenes stuff that you have to negotiate to try to get to the end product, which is putting something on that ideally allows the artist to have their work shown in the most beneficial, supportive way, right? It's all about making, in my mind, it's all about making the work look as amazing as it can. And to do that, there has to be this kind of understanding and supports. So it requires trust and faith and belief from the administration in you, or in the curators and the people that are carrying it out. But it sounds wonderful, but it's not. But I think you're aware of how difficult that is. Yeah. So there's another part to your question, I think.
I was just kind of curious because been having conversations with other tribal colleagues in regards to this understanding about cultural administration in an Indigenous kind of context can be very different, or actually is very different from a cultural administration from a non-Indigenous context, and how to bridge those two together and to find kind of like a new path forward. Especially here in Alaska, there tends to be still a bit pushback in regards to Indigenous expression and participation in culture facilities. So just trying to figure out, as a larger institution, a national institution like you're attached to, who tends, it seems like, gets a lot of support, seeing how you navigate those waters.
What sometimes it's working, it works well, and a lot of times it doesn't, right? So there is critical mass within the institution that's really super important. For a long time, I was the only Indigenous person at the National Gallery, and the only curator, and that gives you, there are benefits to that, and that kind of you're assumed to be an authority, but you're also required to know everything and supply information for everything. So it's a burden. So only recently am I seeing the benefits of critical mass, of having more Indigenous curators, and not just curators, but because it's a large institution, so we have education, we have communications, we have tech services, we have web services, we have everything. So we're starting to get some Indigenous folk working in these different areas, and sadly, for too short of a period, we had someone in communications, and that was like game changing. All of a sudden we had somebody that knew how to communicate Indigenous perspective in what the gallery was putting out to the public, without it having to be run by us to make sure it was okay. So this is on top of your job. Have a look at this press release for a Gauguin exhibition. It's like, oh my God, you guys are saying savage and primitive societies and all this stuff, and it's just like, whoa. So yeah, so I might be getting off track, but
No, everything you said was great. Thank you so much.
So critical mass, again, priorities, yeah, because priorities are established commitments, and that's where the money is what tends to make things happen and demonstrates what is a priority for an institution.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Good morning. I had a question if you could share a little bit about the programming or educational connections that the exhibition did once it was open, and how you connected to communities beyond all the work you did in preparing for the opening. We got to see a lot about that, and I was hoping that you could share a little bit about what occurred after, and that will drive the life of this exhibition and the work that you've done.
Yeah, so that gets back to that critical mass thing too. So because we have somebody, Jamie Morris, MAT, artist and maker working in education, who's really community connected and social media connected. She was able to put together like really important programming. So and I don't, as a curator, having her there meant I didn't have to be involved in all of that. So there were great things that happened in both of the exhibitions. Sakahán had really, I would say, really deep programming involving youth, involving elders, maker spaces, demonstrations in gallery, demonstrations in community, outreach, trips, bringing artists that were installing works in the gallery to communities so that people in communities, local First Nations communities, Mohawk and Algonquin, would have the benefit of having an artist from a different country in the world coming to speak to them about their practice. There was a whole range of things. More recently for Àbadakone, there were a lot of these things previously mentioned, but then, for example, like a kitchen table talk, in the gallery with an artist where they basically had tea and sat there at a table in the gallery, and anybody could come up and sit with them. So there was an elder and Jamie, the artist, and they just facilitated discussions about the practice. There were what we called activations. So there were three kind of organizing ideas for Àbadakone. It was like activation, relations, and continuity. We talked a little bit about continuity with the previous guest there, previous question, but the concept of activations was really important also, because we really wanted viewers to grasp the idea that these practices are very much alive, that they're connected to people. So often you go to an exhibition and you see the art on the walls, and you really have very little opportunity to see a physical person, an artist that's behind what you see. So many of the works were actually activated during the exhibition. So they came with a performance, or they changed during the exhibition. The artist would come in periodically and alter them. So there was a sense of the show always morphing and changing during the run of the exhibition, or you just didn't know what was going to happen that day. There was going to be, you're surprised because there's an artist interacting with the artwork and altering it right in front of you. So those kinds of things happened. I mentioned the welcoming ceremony at the opening ceremony. There was a private ceremony just for the artists to exchange between each other. And that was, a kind of an opportunity for the kinds of reciprocity protocols to take place. There was some gift giving. There was some sharing of song and story. Really, really beautiful, really, really important in terms of what I was talking about as creating opportunities for artists to get to know each other, the networking, the relationship building. So how we are all in relation to each other, and then that's aspects of that are shared with the public and with the institution. Part of the transformation in doing these exhibitions and engaging the institution with the artworks and the artists has been the awareness and the realization and building awareness that it's not, just art, that it's not just an object, that objects have agency and can be spiritually imbued, can be alive, have personhood in some instances. So when we're doing, when we're beginning to bring in ancestral objects into the historical galleries, there's a lot more awareness of how the works need to be treated, and questions coming from conservators, are there any protocols associated with this that we need to be aware of, and practices put in place to accommodate that. So that's all within the last 10 years or so, and it's I think that has in some way been transformative for all the staff to realize little pieces of what we're talking about, this, like that there's a different way of being in the world, that there are different worldviews, and in fact there's a huge diversity of worldviews within the concept of indigeneity, and getting windows through artworks and artists into those different cultural perspectives is very rich and very life-changing for a lot of people, and yeah, I think one of the most enriching parts of certainly what I value in the work that I'm privileged to do.